statements have been made. Donald Trump has announced a total outright ban temporarily for all kinds of immigration to the US. And over here in the UK, there is a definite parallel between this immigration debate and everything that stems from it. It's a sign of our times. I'm not going to go into it any further. You'll find out later in the video when you check out the fiery debate, intense debate that goes on the Piers Morgan show, and some other outtakes that I'm going to throw in here. Let me know what you think in the comments of what's going on. Are there valid points that are being made? Is there something else going on? Let's get it.
If they can't love our country, we don't want them. America will never bend and never yield in the face of terror. And at the same time, we will not be deterred from the mission these service members were so nobly fulfilling.
The president is doubling down, saying, I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover, terminate all of the millions of Biden illegal admissions, including those signed by sleepy Joe Biden's auto pen, and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States. The president says he will be ending federal benefits for non-citizens, denaturalizing migrants who he says undermine domestic tranquility, and deport any foreign national who poses a security risk.
Check out Small Debts and see what services they can offer you on the financial frontier and what stresses and strains they can take off of your hands if you need somebody to represent you to take care of some of your online and otherwise financial matters. Check out the video.
Facing estate agents for repairs or struggling to get your deposit back? The Small Debts Tenant Advocate Service is here to help for as little as £12.50. No jargon, no stress. Our legal team is professional, formal, and built to get results. Start your case today at smalldebts.co.uk.
Especially when failing leaders preside over systems which are chaotic and unsafe. And in the US and the UK, the mistake made by educated and comfortable liberals has been to dismiss everyone who's unhappy as a racist. The issue of immigration and the attitude towards the people who worry about it helped put Donald Trump back in the White House. Many agreed on the problems, as we're now seeing every day, not necessarily the solutions. And with the issue of immigration now threatening to completely reshape British politics, we're going to look at this in more detail on both sides of the pond. Joining me to discuss all this is Konstantin Kistin, the host of Trigonometry, whose new documentary looks at asylum protests in the English town of Crowborough in Sussex. Ollie Dugmore, the digital editor at The New Statesman. Cenk Uygur, the founder and CEO of the Young Turks. And Brandon Tatum, better known as the Officer Tatum. So a stellar panel. Welcome to all of you. Konstantin, you've done this documentary. Yeah. Interestingly, for me, it's centred on the English town of Crowborough, down near the south coast. I actually was brought up in a village literally 3 miles away and still have a home down there. So I'm very aware of this issue because a lot of the locals have been telling me about it and wanted me to get involved. So I'm glad we're doing this. Let's take a clip first and then explain briefly what this is all about.
What are you terrified about?
It's the undocumented men, and it is such a huge saturation for a small area. My son is 11. He won't get to experience walking to school on his own.
Crowborough's a small town. It's a community that is very close-knit. And putting 600 people of unknown origin in a camp, which is actually going to be non-detained and open, is a concern for people.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed walking around, as you know, I live just down the road, is how much of a sense of a community there is here. This is really, it's just the way people live with their families. It's not just a random area for people to be dumped in. So is that part of the concern as well? I know there are a lot of schools next to the camp, and safety is obviously a big issue as well.
Yeah, huge. I mean, this is on the edge of a forest. So you have got completely unlit and little parks, forest areas. So any crimes that do go on, they're going to go unheard and unstopped.
Constantly, really interesting documentary. And, I know a lot of people from Crowborough. There's just a very, average, ordinary little town in East Sussex. They're not a bunch of racists. They're not people instinctively, I think, who would have an abhorrence of foreigners or anything like that. But they are legitimately concerned about this sudden invasion, as they see it, of asylum seekers. They don't know who these people are, where they're from, what crimes they may have committed. All they do know is they've just been dumped right bang in the middle of their town. What do you make of this?
Well, speaking to people there, I think your points are incredibly valid. And I would also add, I think in your intro, you talked about immigration. We need to disentangle these things. This isn't about immigration. This is about people entering our country illegally and then us as taxpayers having to put them up at our expense. And this is part of Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary's plan, of course, to empty the asylum hotels, where hidden in the small print was they would be put on military bases. And when you think of a military base, you think safety, security, it's organized, people are going to be under surveillance. What actually is the case is they can leave the camp, they can walk out of there, they can take the bus. There's a bus stop directly outside. They can take the bus to Tunbridge Wells, which is a town just up the road. They can take a bus to Brighton. And there was a rape on Brighton Beach only a few days ago. 3 men were charged with that rape. They were all asylum seekers confirmed by the Home Office, all from the Middle East. And that's exactly the profile of the people who are going to be housed in this camp. So when you have a town of 20,000 people where you've got 600 unvetted, unchecked men, all men, being housed in this facility that they can leave at will, no infrastructure in the town, nothing for them to do, you can understand why basically the entire community turned out on Sunday, which is what I filmed. And, you know, those conversations you saw, they're representative of what was happening there. This isn't some political thing. This isn't about politics. It's not about right versus left. It's about right versus wrong. And when you put hundreds of young men into this kind of community, of course people are going to be concerned. And not only are they going to be concerned, they are right to be concerned.
Right. Ollie Dugmore, 400,000 people have sought asylum in the UK in the last 4 years. Nearly 40% of asylum seekers arrive on the small boats, which has been an ongoing crisis down on the southern border. Record numbers will have crossed the English Channel, predominantly from France, since the start of 2025 on previous years, despite the Prime Minister saying he'd smashed the gangs. He hasn't done that at all. Nearly the same amount arrive legally as a visitor or on a work or study visa and then go on to claim asylum. Over 100,000 people in the UK currently live in asylum accommodation, and asylum claims in Britain are a record high, with 111,000 applications in the year to June 2025, with a backlog in the appeal system of more than 50,000 people and a waiting time of at least a year. And what causes the agitation is over half of refugees remain on benefits 8 years after they've arrived. There are, for example, 700 Albanian families living in taxpayer-funded accommodation having failed their asylum claim because the UK currently doesn't remove family groups, and so on. So this has been a badly handled thing for a long time under successive governments, Conservative and Labour, in my opinion. And I do think it should be able to be scrutinised without everyone who raises a complaining eye or a concerned eye immediately being branded racist. I think it's so unhelpful to the debate. What do you think is going on here? Why has it got out of control? Why can't we run a better asylum system? What do we do about this?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Piers. I think calling people racists basically is not a productive way to conduct this conversation. In my mind, what's going on here is a complete failure of state capacity, whether it's to process asylum claims, whether it's to build adequate housing and infrastructure for people that do arrive in the UK, top to bottom. It is a story of state failure. In terms of addressing the small boats crisis, my proposal for addressing that is quite simple. I think you should put a processing centre in France. I think people should be able to make their asylum claim there. The French have offered it to us. We declined the opportunity to do so. We can assess whether or not they have a valid asylum claim, and if they do, we can admit them to the UK. They can get on, they can get a job, they can contribute to society, which I think is the ideal that all of us would like. Additionally, if we had that processing centre in France, you've got a pretty good idea then that if someone doesn't want to submit an asylum application and tries to cross the channel in a dinghy, you've got a pretty good idea of whether or not they're trying to get here with a legitimate claim to asylum or not. So that would be my approach to resolving it.
Check Uga, in America, it's been very interesting watching what's happened under the Trump administration. So the big tick in the box that most people can, I think, sign up to with approval is he's pretty well shut the southern border down to illegal immigrants coming in. From various reports, it is estimated that as many as 10 million, maybe more, came over that border in the 4 years under Joe Biden. We don't know the exact number, but broadly speaking, most Americans I've talked to approve of that. Of Trump stopping that happening. They also approve of people who are in the country undocumented. If they commit a crime unconnected to their status, to their immigration status, then they should be deported. Most Americans agree with that. The flashpoint in America has been the extra step through these ICE agents going around places like Los Angeles, picking up undocumented people, seemingly often on a whim or a suspicion, and those people being removed from the country, even if in some cases they've built a family there, they've had kids there, they contribute to society, they're paying taxes and so on. So I think there's been some big wins for Trump on this issue of illegal immigration in America, comparative to his previous administration under Biden, but also this contentious point as to whether if you're in a country illegally, whatever life you built for yourself, however long you've been there, the state should still have the right to just pick you up and throw you out.
Yeah, first of all, you're all racist, and I cancel all of you. Okay, so no, nobody's talking about that anymore. Okay. So listen, there's two different issues on immigration in America. First is, are we allowing too many immigrants in? So let me give you some context on that. For the first time since the 1960s, the number of foreign-born people in America has gone down by 1 million people. And by the way, you can say, hey, the American people kind of like that. That's why they like that Trump, stopped the people coming in from the border. And that's a fair point, right? But are we in some sort of immigrant emergency here in America? No, the number of immigrants are going down, not up. And further context, so about 15% of Americans are foreign born. If that seems like a high number to you, it's much higher in other countries, 22% in Canada, 29% in Switzerland, 30% in Australia. So we don't have some sort of immigration emergency in that sense here. So that context is super important. Nevertheless, I understand that people are wary of change, and sometimes change doesn't bring positive things, right? Or it might bring a lot of positive stuff, but has some negative consequences. So we have to make rational decisions here. Part of the problem, Piers, is that it leads to the second issue, which is that people want you to look at immigrants and say that's the real problem. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't want you to look up. So the guy coming in across the border in America, just crossed the Rio Grande, doesn't have any money, doesn't have any power. He didn't rig the system against you. The donor class in America did. And they desperately don't want you to know that, so they want you to get angry at immigrants instead. So I think the number one source of discontent here in the U.S., and I would bet that it's the same in the U.K., is not the raw numbers. It's that we feel that our government isn't delivering for us. So, the right wing says America first. These days on the Young Turks, we say Americans first. It's because we never get anything. And you see, it's not like these immigrants that are, for example, in Chicago, where people were complaining about it, including, by the way, black and brown communities in Chicago, right? And they were getting a certain stipend, and the stipend's not huge or anything, but as a resident of Chicago, they were looking at that and thinking, I'm not getting anything. And now all of a sudden these guys are getting something. It's not much, but it's something. So why do I never get anything? And the real answer to that, of course, has nothing to do with immigrants. It has to do with the richest people in the country, and mainly corporate rule that has decided that they're going to extract all of our wealth in the form of $35 billion in oil subsidies, endless wars that enrich the defense contractors, and by the way, create waves of new immigrants as unrest in those countries occur. So if you really want to fix these problems, you have to look at the donors and the people in power, the people setting the rules, rather than just hating on new immigrants that came in.
Officer Tatum, one of the big flashpoints in the UK, as I mentioned, these small boats just coming in all the time on the southern border with illegal immigrants pouring in. And then once they get there, the government in the UK feeling obliged to house them, and they're putting them up often in rather nice hotels. And the flashpoint there is, why are these asylum seekers, many of them, they all claim to be, but they're not all legitimate asylum seekers. For example, a year and a half ago, they discovered 15,000 of the year total number who come in on the small boats actually turned out to be young, economic, male Albanians from Albania, which is not a war-torn country. So they weren't genuine asylum seekers. They were economic migrants seeking a better life for themselves. Nothing wrong with that, but they needed a proper process of going through the legal way of getting in. So there's a lot of anger that's been building up by people living through a cost of living crisis, can't afford to feed their kids, real problem with public services as the UK population continues to rise, 50 million back in the 50s, nearly 70 million now, crumbling health service because you can't cope with the extra volume of people, education, all the public services creaking at the seams. And then they have this constant flashpoint of these people coming in illegally and seemingly in many cases being treated better than people already in the country who are there perfectly legally. That's been causing a lot of the anger, which is now erupting in places around the country.
Yeah, it's the same thing that's happening in the United States of America. It's a lot to unpack here. The government is a fraudulent organization when it comes to this illegal immigration stuff, and most of it is from the Democrat Party. They legitimately, or it wasn't legitimate, but they literally opened up the border and allowed every illegal person that they can possibly find to allow them to come into our country, to flood our cities so they can win elections forever. This is exactly what they did. They don't give a flying flip.
And explain, explain why that would help the Democrats win elections.
Well, when you get an influx of people into certain areas and then you give them amnesty, which is the ultimate plan, now you have more electoral college votes. Now you have more Congress representation. All of those things they can leverage. Now,
why would you assume they don't want to vote Democrat though?
Well, let me explain. If you get a bunch of people who have no hope from the country that they came from, and they're believing they come to America, which is utopia, they get all this free stuff, they get all the government funding, and then when you give them amnesty, when you say you are a citizen, you can now stay here. We support you. Who do you think they're going to vote for? The party that does that for them. They've done the same thing to black people in this country. They manipulated the black vote by giving them handouts and different things like that. And now they secured the black vote. That's why black people vote unanimously for Democrats, even though Democrats have done nothing for black people in this country. They plan to do the same thing for illegal aliens. They're losing some of the minority votes. So now they have a new demographic. And also, they don't give a F about these people coming over here. Because if they did, they would shut the border down and have them come through a legal process. Because people are getting raped, children are getting sex trafficked. These people, the cartel, are making money. Coyotes are escorting these people through the desert and leaving them to die. So it's a shame that our government is doing this. And it's not just a minor inconvenience for the American people. We're talking billions of taxpayer dollars spent on housing these people. And they're not just coming over here for a better life. They're unassimilated. They do not want to be a part of America. They want to do their own thing. Their culture is very different than American culture. They're raping people and doing a lot of other things. Now, let me clarify this because I don't want people to take it out of context. It's not every illegal alien that's doing this, but it is enough to be an issue. And we shouldn't even have an issue with this because if you came here illegally, you shouldn't be here in the first place. I don't care if your grandma, nana, whoever it is, built a life here. You built it on illegal terms. That's like me breaking in your house, Piers, and I'm living there. And all of a sudden I start cooking in your house and I have a kid and now my kid live in your house. Somehow I'm afforded all of the amenities that you've built. No, that don't work like that. You got to go home. You got to get out of here. You should have never been here in the first place.
All right, Constantine, you wanted to get in there.
Well, there's a few things that both Cenk and Brandon, the few points that they made, I think are relevant but different in the UK, in particular this Crowborough protest that I spoke to people at. One of the things they were very keen to emphasize is there are hundreds of Ukrainians living in the town or have been living in the town over the last 2 or 3 years within families, within homes that people welcome them in. But what they're saying is there's a big difference between women and children fleeing war and people who get on a boat in France, throw their passport or their ID in the sea, and then get here and a single man being housed, unvetted, unchecked, etc. So, well, again, I think it's very important. The conversation's been about immigration. This is not about immigration. Both the United States, where I spent a lot of time, Brandon and Cenk have both been on my show when we've been over there, right? You guys both know this. America is the most pro-immigrant country in the world that I've ever been to. UK, probably second or third in terms of some other places that you might compare it to. These are welcoming countries that we live in. We welcome people to come here, start businesses, be contributors. But when you come to this country and you are someone who's deliberately broken the rules in order to get in here, we're right to be suspicious of you, and we should be keeping these people under lock and key so they can't go out into the local community and threaten and menace women, children and residents, elderly residents. And in Crowborough, the place I filmed, do you know that you probably know this, Piers? The police station there is unmanned because it's such a safe place. Now, what happens when you've got hundreds of people running around who you don't know what they are and they've got nothing to do? You've got big problems building up because of that. Just nothing of the fact, we've got the same problem that Brandon mentions in the UK, where at one point we were spending £1 million a day on hotels for illegal immigrants. And the cost of housing on these military bases is basically the same.
Although it is an illegal immigration issue, what we're talking about here, there's also been a massive legal immigration issue, Constantine, in the UK, where a year or so ago, they worked out nearly 1 million people in terms of net migration for the year had come into the UK. A lot of it was obviously Ukraine and a lot from Hong Kong and places like that, but a huge number of people, like I say, into a country already creaking at the seams in terms of its ability for the public services to serve the current population. Again, all that does is create a lot of tension. And it turned out the biggest problem was not bringing in like highly skilled people who can contribute well to society and so on, who you want to bring to a country, any country. But they were allowed to bring a huge number of dependents with them. Families of 5, 6, 7 people were coming in with each of the people allowed in. That was actually the big problem. But, if you start rising the population of the UK by 1 million a year, very, very quickly, you're going to see the problems we've been seeing massively exacerbated.
Well, let me make just a very brief bit of context, give a very brief bit of context that I think sets the UK situation in a very clear light. We had the Blair government and 13 years of the Labour government then, and then it got worse under the Conservatives thereafter, as you made the point. Under one government, we had more people come into this country than had come to Britain in its entire history. Since the Battle of Hastings in 1066 up until 1950, the number of people that came in under Blair and Brown was higher than the total over 1,000 years.
And that was mainly from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Right? So this wasn't a question. This is why when the genuine racists get into this debate, which is always an unfortunate side effect of it, they often come at it from a skin colour perspective. It's the brown and black people that are the problem. Actually, as Constantine just rightly said, in the first part of this century, it was opening the floodgates, quite literally, to a lot of people from Eastern Europe who were white. But that was what caused the initial big problem, I think.
I agree. And I think you then add on top of that the subsequent Conservative governments, which then opened the floodgates to the rest of the world. And so we've got this cumulative problem. And look, it's very important to say, I mean, there are differences between different groups of people. And so, you mentioned the racism point. Well, we've had tens of thousands of Hong Kongers come in. Do you hear lots of anti-Hong Konger rhetoric in this country? We've had hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians fleeing the war come in. Are you hearing lots of anti-Ukrainian sentiment? No, because ultimately this is a cultural problem. And this point Brandon made very well. When you have people coming from certain places where, let's be honest, women are considered second-class citizens, if not cattle, then of course you're going to be expecting that some of the incidents that we've seen, whether it's grooming gangs, whether there's lots of other problems that we've had up and down the country. So we also have to be reasonable and actually delineate between immigration, legal immigration, and what we basically have is people coming illegally against the wishes of the British public. And the final point I'll make is this. Both in the United States and here, nobody, and I mean nobody, voted for this. Nobody voted for this. Nobody signed up to this. And I'm glad we're sitting here with the four of us from different political perspectives. And all of us now today agree it's not racist to bring this up. But also, let's be honest, Piers, 5 years ago, bringing these points up would have got you demonized.
We wouldn't have had the debate.
Correct.
Right? Because people would have said, if you're raising any concerns about this, obviously you're a racist.
And that's one of the benefits of this problem getting so bad. At least we're finally allowed to talk about it.
Ollie, what do we do about the fact that it does, unfortunately, always bring out the genuine racists, right? There are genuine racists. They're sort of more easily identifiable now because of things like social media. We can see them in the marches or whatever. But there is a racist element who don't want any foreigners coming into the country. And that tends to turn the debate into something rather different. What do we do? How do we have this debate and sort things out without that element exploiting it?
Great question, Piers. I would also clarify as well this point about sort of the racism that black and brown people experience and the racism that people of Eastern European descent experience as well. I used to work in a McDonald's with 50% of the staff was from Poland, and I assure you there is plenty of anti-Polish racism amongst the British public, even though they're white people as well. Yeah, of course there is. And I remember at the time as well, there was plenty. But look, how do you confront racism? Multi-pronged approach. Education being the primary one. I think a strong functioning economy, a functioning state is a second one. I think the debate we've been having, like for example that police station in Crowborough that Constantine mentioned. Yeah, I'm sure Crowborough is a pretty safe place. Police stations and police officer numbers over the last 14 years were cut. every touchstone in this conversation, sort of the failure of the state, whether it's in the planning of skills and training, medicine is a great example, Piers. You spoke about the NHS, right? Huge number of foreign-born doctors in the NHS. Huge number of British-trained doctors that the British state has invested in training, going abroad to practice medicine in other countries. Like, these don't seem like sort of intractable problems for us to solve. And I think that the sort of I would commend the sort of the tenor of the debate so far on this programme. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have a conversation about sort of the costs and the benefits, costs and benefits of 1 million people coming in, costs and benefits of net zero people coming in. There's clearly a middle ground between the two. Both involve trade-offs. Probably at the extreme end of one, you're talking about social cohesion. At the extreme end of the other, you're talking about some pretty significant macro effects to the economy. There is a balance between those two things that we should strike. But primarily in terms of confronting the far right, absolutely, it's education, it's a strong economy, and in extremis, it's confronting them face to face.
We could just deal with the problem. I mean, this is the other problem, right? Is if you didn't have illegal immigration, there wouldn't be any racists getting any support at all, because the British public is overwhelmingly not of that world.
Well, that's why it's interesting. Like Tommy Robinson regularly goes on American Airways, and he sells them a bit of a dummy story about himself. He's like this, picked upon, poor, oppressed guy who's just preaching the truth and so on. There's a lot more complicated than that. But the reason he's getting more and more support from people who I would certainly not categorise as far right or racist is because he's exposing very loudly genuine problems. I mean, Cenk, this is the thing, isn't it? You're always going to attract the far right for this stuff. And that's a very unsavoury aspect of it. But I do think that the governments in America and the UK have brought this all on themselves. They fermented a lot of this anger amongst ordinary people. And what you're seeing now is a lot of ordinary people who are not on the far right or the far left. I know Crowborough, this town, well. They're just regular people. Near my village, they want to go to the pub, play a bit of sport at the weekend, have local schools, they all know each other. It's very genteel down there. And suddenly they've got 600 male asylum seekers from all parts of the world. No one knows much about them. They're very concerned about how they're going to be able to move around. And you don't need many. As Officer Tatum highlighted there, obviously they're not all criminals. For all we know, none of them might be criminally minded. But it wouldn't take much in terms of one or two of those people in there to commit some heinous crime in Crowborough for that to become a real powder keg. And then people would attack the people of Crowborough. And I'd be like, well, hang on. Just hang on a second. This was inflicted on them as a society. And if it blows up in their face in an ugly way, it's going to cause a lot of unrest.
Yeah. So let me address both sides of that. So first of all, for the folks who are worried about race and all that, and is it anti-immigrant mentality is by definition racist? No, because I can give you examples from other countries again. And for example, in Turkey, they took in a ton of Syrian immigrants and Afghan immigrants because of the wars there. And a lot of the native Turks were pissed. They didn't want it either, right?
Well, Germany. I mean, in Germany, it cost Angela Merkel a job.
These are interesting times we're living in and continuously changing. Thank you again for spending some time here at CornerSpeak with myself, Onyu. And for now, I'm out, and I'll catch up with you down the road. Be good, be safe, be creative.